All right, so now we're going to move on to removing projects from our list, right? We've got an add. Obviously, our plus button doesn't do anything at the moment yet, so we will be linking that up a little bit later. But we have our add project function, so let's go to removing projects from our list, because that is also going to be a thing. You know, sometimes you've gone and started, you know, adding a project, and then you realize, oh, maybe you've named it incorrectly, or you need to maybe combine it with some other project, or the project gets cancelled or whatever. So we need to be able to remove stuff from our JSON file without having to go and manually edit it. Of course, like I've said before, we can edit things manually with JSON files, which is one of the benefits of it. But you know, we want to kind of provide a much easier way for the user to remove them, because maybe we understand Python, we coded it, so we know how to just go in and edit the JSON file. But what about someone else? Or even what about you, but you know, way in the future where you've forgotten exactly where the config file is stored or exactly how it's structured, and it's just much easier to have a nice convenient button that says, hey, just remove this item from the list. Okay, so we're going to build another function over here called remove project. All right, well, remove proj, right? And at the moment we don't have any arguments for it. And what we're going to need to do is essentially we're going to be asking the user to select from a list of projects that already exist in our JSON file, and then whichever ones they select, then we'll remove. And then obviously after removing them, we need to store that back in the JSON file. So we're essentially reading from it, then asking them a question based on what we read, and then writing out a new file. So the way to ask the user to select from a list is pretty self-explanatory. It's who.ui.select from list. Okay. If we go down here, you'll see there, select from list. Okay. And that allows us to feed them a bunch of choices. So we give a list of choices. So it's a sequence of strings containing the possible choices. And then we can give default choices if we want. We can say exclusive, which that if exclusive is false, which it is by default, that will allow them to multi-select, which is great because actually, why not allow them to multi-select? If they want to remove multiple projects in one go, we can do that. So we don't have to force them to select only one at a time. We can provide a message if we want to explain what they're actually selecting, or a title. So we've got all of these arguments. So let's build around that. Okay, and then actually we should double check. So let's provide let's do a quick little test in here. So we'll just say A, B, and C. So that's our list of choices, and that's the minimum that we have to give, is just a list of choices. It pops up like this. That's our title. We have no message, but we can see what it looks like if we have a message. We can multi-select, and when we click accept, it returns a list of what was selected from that list. Okay, including what if we select nothing and say accept, it returns empty, and if we cancel, it returns empty as well. So again, these are things we need to know when working with us with this as a script. Okay. So we're going to do our who.ui.select from list. But the list we're going to provide is actually something that already exists. We're not going to manually go and fill this in. We have that list. Okay, we have a dictionary of projects where the key is the project name, and then the value is a dictionary with additional information about that project. Now, remember, when we on a dictionary, when we run my dictionary.keys, it creates a list, an iterable list of items which are just your keys. So it drops the values from it, and it takes just your keys and assembles them into a list, right? So that is exactly what we want to do here. So let's store that in a variable. So we'll just call it projects, or whatever you want to call it. And remember, we have at the top here, we are reading in our data. Okay, so data exists whenever we run something from this. Okay, so we can import that data. We can say data dot keys. Okay, We could, if we wanted to be, I guess, a little bit safer, we could go and run this actual reading of the data inside of our function if we wanted to, which actually is probably a better idea. So maybe let's do that. You know, in my original script, I've actually got it up here, but actually now that I'm thinking about it, I think it's better to put it inside, because then when this function runs, it causes it to read, which means it's going to read it at the time of every time that button is pressed, which is a good thing because maybe something's changed since then. Maybe manually we've gone and removed another item. So it's probably a good idea to actually add the reading in to our project there, right? Yeah, we can still have the actual path stored as a global variable above all of these things, because that path is not going to change constantly. You know, we set it once, maybe at some point if we go and restructure it, we will change it, but we would expect to change it and then restart Houdini or whatever. But at least here, every time we run this add project or remove project function, it will then do the read of that and recreate the data for us. Okay, so we're going to do that. Right. In fact, since we're going to run it in two places, better than actually putting it like that is we would let's go and embed this in a function instead. Right. So let's go put this inside of a function. So we'll say define. I guess we'll just say read JSON or something like that, and then we do that, and then at the end of it we return data. Okay. So now we've created a function from it, and then instead here in add project we can just say data equals, and then we just do read JSON. Right. So that's probably a much better way to handle this. Okay. And now we look at data.keys to assemble our list, and then when we do our who.ui.select from list, we're going to feed it that list. So we say projects, whoops. And then some of the other arguments that we're going to want to use is, so select from list, we have list. We also have exclusive, which, like we said, we're going to leave that as false because we don't mind if they select multiple. Let's provide a message. Okay. Let's be very clear about what it is, and in fact, if we pop back here, do this, but let's provide a message. Let's see how that appears, so that we can kind of see where that's going to appear. Yeah, so it comes up there, and this would be a good place to explain what this choice is. So I think it's really good to probably provide a message, and maybe a title as well if you want to, and then. Let's have a look at what other arguments we have as well. Let's just double check before we move on what other ones we would want to follow. Right, we'll pop up a help file who.ui. Come on. Who.ui. It's being a bit slow this morning. Right, so let's go select from list. Okay, so we've got choices, default choices. We don't want any default choices. We don't, not going to pop up with a list of things already selected. Exclusive is false. We're going to give a message. Maybe we should give a title as well. Column heading, header. I mean, choices. That's fine. I mean, we could say projects or something, I guess. Yeah, let's do that. Let's be more explicit. Number of visible rows, I mean, that should be fine. Clear on cancel, so that says that if set to true, then an empty tuple is returned when the selection is cancelled. Otherwise, the initial selection is returned. Okay, well, we want to know when they've clicked cancel, and it's much clearer if that is set to false. Okay, no, set to true, an empty tuple is returned. Okay, so let's set that to true. All right, so now we know what we're going to do. We're going to provide a message, a title. Let's do a column header, and then clear on cancel. Okay, so let's go do that. Message, we're going to say select project to remove. Okay. Title would be something like remove project. You know, that's the tool that we're running. So we're sort of the title of the whole dialogue is that we're running the remove project function, but then we tell them exactly what they're supposed to be doing, which is create a selection essentially. And then I think it's column header was something like, we'll just say projects. Okay, just so that it makes a little bit more sense. Was it column header like that? Yeah, it should be fine. Just a string, and then clear on cancel all with underscores. Okay, so clear on cancel equals true, right? And then here we're gonna just take from this argument and push it to the next line. In fact, hang on, before we do that, remember we need to store this in a variable, so I'm gonna store this in, I'm just gonna say cell, like selection, because we're selecting from list, so I'm just gonna use cell, and then now when we click, push that to the next line, it'll line up correctly. Okay, so let's test this and see what happens. So we'll print cell so that we can see what comes out of that. And then now let's run this from Houdini. So we're going to say from project tools import main as proj. Let's reload proj, and then we go proj dot remove proj. No arguments. It pops up, and there we go. See, we have a list of projects that we already have in our JSON file. Okay, it's like magic. And our title is remove project, our message is select project to remove, and then we have a list of projects. We can select one or both or whatever, and then when we click accept, it's going to return 0 or 1 or whatever it was that we had selected. Okay, we could have both selected, we could click cancel. Okay, so that's what it's printing. So now we know what we're working with essentially. Okay, so if they cancel or accept with nothing selected, then we obviously want to do nothing, right? And we know that they've done that if the length of that tuple that it returns is 0. Okay, so we're just going to say if len of selection equals 0, then just let's return from our function here, because we don't need to do anything else. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we need to basically loop through that list of selected indices from our list, and for each one of them we need to go and select the item in our projects list, because we need that name, that original name. Essentially we're converting from this list of integers to actual strings which relate to our the keys in our dictionary, and then we're going to remove those specific keys. Okay, because in order to remove that key we have to refer to it using that key. Okay, so let's loop through our list. Right now we may be looping through a list of 1, but that's fine, but obviously if it's 0 we've already returned. So now we say for I in cell, which is our selection, and then so let's get the actual project name that we want to remove. Okay, so we can store it as something like key, or we could call it project to remove or something like that. So we can say maybe something like key is, because we're converting here from essentially integers to keys. So we're going to take I, which is the index in that list. So let's say we selected 2 and 5 from the list, right? So then it's going to go through, I will be equal to 2. It's going to go and look at the second item in this project's list, which is the list that was used in the selection. So they relate in terms of integers. So when we select item number 2 from that list, it will be the same item from this list. Okay. So we select the second item from that list. That is the key that we want to go and remove. And then we would just say, so we refer to our dictionary, data, and then we give it the key. But what we want to do is remove that. And how we do that is through the del function. So we just delete that key, okay, from the dictionary. So now our data should be altered, right? We've altered our actual Python dictionary. So let's check that that does work, and then the last step is just going to be to write out the new dictionary. Okay, so let's jump back into Python, or to Houdini. Let's reload proj, and then let's run our remove. Now our remove has 2 items in the list. If I click accept, right, then nothing will happen because obviously it returns. If I select 1 item, click accept, then it's going to show me my data, so my Python dictionary, which has only 1 item left in it now. See, new test, right? If I go and select new test and say accept, then it has only 1 item left, which is test proj. And if I select both, then it returns an empty dictionary. Okay, so that is working correctly and as we expect, but we just now need to write this out. And obviously we're just going to basically do the same thing we did over here. Okay, so we're just going to say with open, and then we are going to grab proj list. Remember, that's our the path to our actual project list JSON file, and then we're going to write it using the write mode. Okay, and then we can just say f. Okay, remember we don't want to use file because file is already a word that we kind of are using, right? And then we dump data f, and then we still want to sort keys and indent to be 4, okay? Because otherwise every time we overwrite or remove something from the dictionary, if we don't still also sort the keys and indent it, then we'll have a nice neat list until we remove something, and then it just makes it, because remember, this is overriding it. It's not just going and removing some stuff. It literally is creating a brand new dictionary based on the old one with some things removed and then writing it out. Okay, so let's try this now in Houdini. So we're going to reload proj, and now let's remove a project from the list. So let's remove test project. Okay, so now when we run it again, you'll see that project is no longer in the list. Okay, we can remove this one as well. Now our list is empty. Okay, we can also do proj.add proj, in which case we can then go and navigate to where we were, which was I think we were somewhere near here, right? So let's copy this in, go here, rebel way, and then let's say we want to add that project, we add that in, we set the information, we give it a code. Okay, and now when we go proj.remove, we'll find it in the list. Okay, so we now have some functioning tools. So before we return to our scene data node to finish the coding for that, I just want to show you one more function that we're going to build for this. And this is because, the user can add and remove projects, and that's great, but there is some sort of, I guess, hidden information about these projects in our JSON file. And we don't really want the user to have to go and open the config file. You generally want to avoid that. Yes, maybe somebody who really knows what they're doing, maybe your R&D department, or if you have an R&D rep in the effects department or whatever one you work in, that person may know where the config file is and why they would need to go and look at it. But you just want to make it nice and convenient for the users, but also you want them not messing around in things that could actually alter the projects and all the data in it. So we want them to be able to view the information in that file without changing it. So let's create a function that allows them to just return all the information. Because remember, we've got a project name, we've got a code, we've got an FPS, essentially all the data that we have stored in our list here. Would be nice to print a little report essentially and kind of show the user a little snippet of this. Especially if, in this case, we've kept it very simple, but you could have tons of data stored under the project. And then you'd want to be able to have the people view it without altering it. Okay, so we're going to say define, and let's call this like project details. Well, we'll actually call it details underscore proj just to stick with this convention. We've got add project, remove project, and so here we'll just have the details of the project, okay, just so we can kind of stick to that convention. Now what we're going to do is something similar to this remove, where we're actually reading in our list and opening up kind of a UI of a list of projects to say to them, hey, which project is it that you actually want the information for? Okay, because we don't necessarily want to print out all the information for every project. In this case, we've got 1 or 2 projects with a little bit of information. That's not a bad thing, but if you have a much bigger pipeline and much more information per project, it's going to be a bit overwhelming. So let's give them first a choice of which project they're actually looking for. Okay, so we'll do something similar. We'll call it project equals data.keys, right? And then, oh, but remember, we're going to need to create the data. So we do data equals read JSON. So we rely on our function that we were running before. We now go our selection equals who.ui.select from list. So we're doing something very similar to what we've done in the previous one. We provided the list of projects. There are a few differences here. One thing is that the exclusive, we want this to be true because we want to present information for one project at a time. Sure, they can remove multiple projects at a time because we don't really need to present any information. We're just going to go and remove. But here we want to kind of print out a report of that project. Okay, so we'll do one at a time. So we force it to be one at a time. Now then let's provide a message. So we'll just tell them you need to select project to view details. Okay, so that's the message. We can give a title, so that would be something like project details or whatever. And then maybe we can also provide the column header, and that was just projects. And then clear on cancel, same kind of thing. We want that to be true, because if they cancel, we want to know that they've canceled because that list is empty. Okay, so that should be everything we need. We can push that to the next line, so Python is happy. Now same thing as well if they have selected nothing. So if the len of cell equals 0, then we'll just return. Oops. But otherwise, so what we're going to do is we need to go and select the one project that they have selected. Okay, here we did it in a list, but obviously we don't need to do that this way because we don't have a list this time. So the project that they have selected is, and then we just go to projects, and then we feed it the index. Okay, but how do we get that index? Well, we grab our selection, which will be only one index, because if it's 0 it'll return, and if it's more than 1 it won't allow it because of exclusive. But remember, that's still a tuple. Even though it's got one item in it, it's still a tuple, so we need to just provide 0 to grab the first index from that tuple. Okay, so this is how we grab the key for our project. Okay, so I've called it proj, but you could call it key or whatever it is that you want. Okay, and now we want to get the data from data, okay, like our actual project information from our dictionary. So we're going to give it data and then provide proj as the key, but we need to store that somewhere, so we'll just call it proj data. Okay. And now what we want to do is just print that information. So for now I'm just going to print so that we can see what we're working with, but really what we want to do at the end is print it in a much nicer way. Okay, so let's print this and see what happens. Okay, so we'll reload proj, and then we're going to say proj dot details proj. We'll select our one project. Okay, and then what it prints is a dictionary. Okay, this is not very nice, it's not very good looking. We don't really want to do it that way. We would prefer to have some very nice printed information for the user. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So instead of doing it in here, I'm actually going to build a separate function for this, right? Because I actually know that this is a function we're going to want to do several times in the future, is actually be able to print sort of reports. Okay, similar to our errors where you want to return an error, well, sometimes you actually want to print some information. And so I often find it very useful to create a function that allows us to print things in a nice, neat way, especially because when your tools are providing information, whatever it is that they're doing, even if it just you want to provide information of the fact that it did something in the background. So, oh, I went and created a folder for you or did whatever. You want to print that out in a way that is noticeable. Okay, stuff gets lost in this terminal if it's just line after line, or it gets printed like that. I mean, that is just, this does not look good. Okay, how much nicer would it be if you printed something where it had, like, you know, this and then my heading, you know, so a nice big kind of line of text like this, and then underneath that was, I mean, obviously it's going to error out now, but then underneath that you'd have your report, things printed and formatted nicely, and then you'd end your report with a nice sort of row of, you know, to sort of essentially, like, you know, have a heading and sort of this section of text where you can visually see that between these two lines is the report that tool is printing out, instead of just a bunch of like random lines in a terminal. Okay, if we're gonna expect our users to have a Python shell open and read what's happening, we at least need to present it in a nice way. Okay, so that's what we're gonna kind of try and do. So I'm going to create a function over here. So I'm just going to call it print report, right? Because sometimes, you know, it's going to be used across multiple scripts. Right now we've got it all in one, but we're going to be taking our fixed path, our error, and our print report, and we're going to put that in a utility module. Okay. So you saw from what I was just explaining now that we're going to actually want a header for this report, and then a bunch of text inside, so the actual body, right? So let's provide those as arguments. So we're going to expect our user to give us a header, and then we're going to expect them to give us a body of text. Now, the thing with the text in there is we want it to be allowed to be on multiple lines. So I kind of want the user to provide me with a bunch of single lines that we can then print on each individual line, right? So I'm going to provide, I'm going to say star body. So what this means is that it's going to create an argument, so a variable inside of this block called body, but that will be wrapped. Okay, so it is going to be a list of arguments that will be provided by the user. So when they run this function, they're going to just say print report. They're going to provide a heading, and then if they provide something, comma, something else, whatever, foo, they can just give a long list, and it will take all of those and wrap them up as a list in one variable. Okay. So that's how this works. Okay, I know we did speak about this before, but obviously if you're new to it and you've never used it, this is now a practical use of it. So I'll show you how this works. Right. So the first thing we're going to do is print our header. So that's pretty obvious. So we're going to print, but one thing I notice, you'll see when we print in here, it's everything is just always, you know, immediately it's on the next line. And so it kind of gets lost. You'll see I just automatically, I like to kind of keep things separate. So I even just hit enter a few times to try and get away from all of that body of text before I print something, so I can see what was printed that was new. Okay, it's nice when there's a bit of a gap, right? So I'm going to go and do that by actually providing at least one new line, an empty line, before we even provide our header. Okay. Then what I want to do is I want to print that header, but because it's obviously a variable, I want to use formatting. Okay, so I can call it 0, or I can call it header. It depends on what you want to do. If we use a keyword, then we have to just provide in the format. When we say .format, we just have to say header equals, right? But or otherwise, you could just put 0 and then just provide the header in there. It's totally up to you, okay? But what we want to do is we want to format this as well, right? So we want to center align it in amongst a list of other characters. You saw I used equal signs over here because those kind of stand out quite nicely. So you could use equals, or you could use dashes or underscores if you wanted, or whatever it is that you want to use as characters to kind of split it up and almost create like an underline and a, you know, it's like you're just drawing a line across the page. So should we do equals since we'd used them before? So we'll say equals. And then remember we want to center align it. So you put the amount of alignment, oh, sorry, the type of alignment. So that upward arrow is center aligned. Okay. You could also obviously have left aligned or right aligned. So we're going to say center aligned, and we'll say to 50 characters. Okay. Oh yes, it's weird. Okay, this Python, it's going to complain saying that upward arrow is not a supported format character. But it is. I don't understand why it's complaining like this, but I mean, you know, we've done that before. You know, if we say here, okay, print, and then we provide a thing, and we say format test, right, and then in here we do colon, and then we, let's say, do our equals that 50, right? That works. So I don't know what it's complaining about, but you can basically just ignore it, right? Because that's exactly what we want it to do. You'll also notice that there is no spaces on either side, which kind of bothers me. I don't know about you guys. So I like to actually just go and put a, on this side of that. Okay, because remember, everything inside of the curly braces are going to be replaced. So after the new line, I like to put at least one. Oh no, actually, I guess that's gonna. I guess we would have to provide. How do we get it to put a space there? I guess in our header we would have to put spaces on either side. I guess it's too much work, so we'll just leave it like this. This should be fine. Okay, so we're gonna do that, and then on the next line, well. Let's at the end of the report, we also know that we're going to want to do the same kind of thing. So provide a whole bunch of these equal signs, right? At the sort of the base, right? Now we don't have to do. We could do it this way. We could do that and then provide the same thing. We do head with an equals. And then center align to 50 or whatever, but we just provide nothing, like we format, but provide it with literally nothing, so an empty string. But that seems like a lot of work to do that. Instead, we can just provide it with one character, and then you can just say times 50, and it will actually print 50 equal signs all the way across the bottom, right? And then obviously our header is center aligned to 50 characters, which means that it's not actually going to print 50 of these equal signs. It's going to subtract the amount of space that we need for the header. Okay. And then in between those, now we just want to go and print the body. But remember, our body is a list. So what we want to do is for each list, we want to print a new line. Okay. But when we print a new line. If I say print A, and then print B, A and B will be printed on two separate lines. Okay, so basically we just want a loop. So we're going to say for, and then should we just say B in body, and then we just say print, and then yeah, just print B, right? So we're going to print each one at a time. Okay. We could obviously go, if we wanted to format it a little bit, we could. So maybe we want to tab it in or something like that so that it's not on the far left. So we could do that by doing something like 0.format B. So we put B in there, but then over here we would maybe go and put a tab or something like that. So we'd tab in. So you can sort of set this up in any way that you want, but basically we're then going to be able to print that report, right? Just want to try something over here. Yeah, it's funny. It's funny that the equal sign it complains about, but it doesn't complain about the equal sign. It complains about that upward arrow. So maybe let's swap it for dashes, just single dashes. Okay. Right. So now I'm going to save this. I'm going to jump back into Houdini. We're going to reload proj, and now we're going to say proj dot print report. We need to provide it with a header. So my heading, and then a list of a body to print. So this is some text, this is another line, something else. Okay, so we can provide it with as many lines as we want, and then it prints a little, so it puts a space, then has sort of draws a line, puts my heading at the center of that, and has this with a tabbed, each line tabbed in, and then draws a line at the bottom. Okay, much nicer way to then print a report for what the tool is doing. Okay, because it stands out, and you can see that everything that tool did is between these lines. So sure, if multiple tools were running at the same time, you'd then see a whole bunch of these, but it's there's a heading for each one. It tells you what happened inside that tool. It's really useful. Okay, so we're going to rely on this in future. So later we'll offload these to an actual utility script, and then we'll just come back and run them like that. So instead of printing our project data over here, what we're going to do is run our print report function. And then what we're going to do is provide it with, okay, of course, a heading, right? So the heading is just something like, project details or whatever, okay? And comma, but then we want to go and give it a whole list of things. Now, we can obviously list them all one after one another, but it's easier and it's easier to read if we actually put it on separate lines in our actual code as well. Okay, so we want to provide the name, right? But we need to give them a bit of a heading like that. So we're going to say name : and then provide the name of the project. Okay, so dot format, and then we know that the name of our project is here, is proj, right? Because we even asked them to select it, right? So we know that name. Then we end with a comma. Then let's give the project code, right? So exactly the same thing, and we're going to format, and then we're going to give them the code. Now the code is in our project data. Remember, that's our dictionary over here that we took from when we fed it the key of the project name, okay? Which means that it is just that mini dictionary. So it's not the full dictionary, it's this dictionary over here, which has code, FPS, and path, right? So we're going to feed project data code, and then we're going to do the exact same thing for the other bits of information, right? So I'm going to paste this twice, but this one will be, let's put the path, and then here we're going to put FPS. Right, and now this should print that information for whatever project we choose. So we come in here, we reload proj, and then we say proj dot details proj lets us select a project from our list. We say, tell me the details about this, and it prints out the name of the project, the code, the path to that project, and the FPS, all within a nice little report. Okay. You could also set up, if you wanted to, you could have it pop up a who.ui. So if you want to go ahead, you can do that and add that feature in to here. In fact, if you wanted, you could even build a sort of a utility function like this that would then pop up a printed report, or you could build it into this. Maybe the print report has an optional argument that says, okay, which remember your other arguments are going to need to come here before you reach your star args, okay? So then there'll be an optional argument over here which allows you to choose whether or not you want to pop up a who.ui display message with that report printed as well, just in case maybe your user is not does not have a Python shell open. Okay, Right, so now that we're done with these kind of project tools, we're able to add and remove projects, but now we're going to go and attach those scripts to these buttons over here for the callbacks. We're going to build this menu, which also is going to be checking our project data, and then we can move on to actually the things, the code that is more specific to this scene data actual node, which will go in its own module. All right, now before we move on to attaching our scripts to these buttons over here, one of the kind of easiest ways, but that's also going to help us set that all up, is the shelf tool. So we want to create a shelf tool, of course, to be able to run this, because it's not only the scene data node that should be able to add and remove projects. Okay, it's just, like I said before, a convenience thing that on the scene data node, it also has buttons that will trigger sort of the main project management script, right? But it's sort of like the primary way of doing that should be through the shelf tool, and that we've just gone and provided an additional button or two on our scene data node because that just happens to sort of relate to what we're doing here with projects. Okay, so it's kind of like, you know, especially older TVs used to have like a lot more functionality on the actual TV, all the buttons to change all sorts of things, and then the remote used to be like really simple, just kind of switching it on and off or whatever. Nowadays, obviously, it's switched around the entire opposite way. Basically, you need the remote in order to control the TV, but the other older remotes used to be the other way, and that's kind of what we're doing here. The main thing is actually this shelf tool, but then we're providing just an additional little convenience button over here to trigger some of those. Okay, so really what we've been doing up till now, building this script, is actually, this is the shelf tool for this, right? So what we're going to do is create a new shelf tool. Now, I know we've obviously got that one over there, so I'm going to delete that, right? So we've got this one here, but I'm going to create a brand new one just so we can go through that process together. So we're going to say new tool, right? I'm also going to go edit shelf just to grab the path to my shelf so that I can paste it in here. So I'm saving specifically to that shelf. I'm going to call this one manage proj, but I'm going to put class at the end just because I know that mine is manage proj, but you know, it already exists. Again, it's like with the scene data node, you do not need to add this bit at the end if you don't want to. You can just call yours manage proj. Okay, and then over here, manage project. Well, I'm just going to call it like this, just because I need to shorten it so that I can make sure I can see the word class in here, so I don't get the two buttons confused. Okay, but again, you can just call it manage projects in the label nice and neatly. Okay, so when I click apply, you'll see there I have now this button that I can click. All right, so you can go and set an icon, you can do all of that kind of stuff yourself, or add hotkeys. Now what we're going to want to do in here in the script, we want to just go and point on disk, essentially like we've been doing through the Python shell, and go and essentially run these functions that we've created over here, right? But we don't want to, you know, we don't want to have to create a button for each one of these functions, you know, add project, remove project details. We don't want to fill up our shelf with a bunch of those. So and then obviously I've told you before, we can do things like control clicking it, shift clicking it, so you could go that route if you wanted. But in this case, I find that it's a little bit easier to maybe pop up a list of buttons that relates to this, you know, kind of sub buttons. Because again, we don't want to fill up our shelf with a bunch of buttons, but we also don't want our user to have to know that they need to control click it or shift click it in order to add or remove projects. Because what if you click it the wrong way around and you think you're asking for the details of a project, but actually you're busy removing one? So let's be a little bit smarter about that and rather just pop up a list of options of kind of the sub tools that fall under this, all right? So we're going to build a function to do that. And again, we're not going to do that in our shelf tool. The shelf tool is only going to trigger a script that it lives over here, right? So we're going to add one more function to our script body here, which will be something that pops up a UI That UI is going to allow the user to click a bunch of buttons, and depending on which one they select, we are going to then trigger either our add, remove, or details. And of course, later on, if you add any other features to this, then you can do that too. Right, so let's add it in over here. We'll go back to the shelf tool in a second, but let's actually build this. So what we're going to want to do, so let's say define, and we'll just call it manage proj, the same as the button. Okay, and we're just going to do a who.ui, and in this case it's going to be a who.ui.display message, because remember with this we're displaying a message, but then we can provide a list of buttons. So in this case the message is actually not that important, it's just a simple message to tell them what they're selecting, but the buttons themselves are the real important choice for our user. So the message would be something like select an action, or whatever you want to put, right? But now our buttons is a list of strings, and then we want to allow them to either add projects, or you can put the full word if you want, like add project or whatever. You'd have to experiment with the sort of spacing, the amount of space that each button has, but in this case let's just keep it simple and just say add, remove, and details, right? But we always want to provide an option for our user to cancel, because what if they want to do neither of those things? Okay, even something non-destructive like details, we don't want them to have to go through this process. If they click the button and realize that it's not something they want to do, they should be able to cancel at any point. Okay, so that's all we're going to do in here, but then we want that to obviously be stored in some kind of variable, because we need to know what they have gone and selected, right? And now depending on which one they clicked, we're going to do something. Right, so for now I'm going to just print this so we can test this, and we're going to link it up to our shelf tool. Then we'll finish writing this script. Okay, so we're going to come in over here, and exactly the same way that we've been doing it through the Python shell, we're going to do it over here. But I just want you to note that we have to import the module. See, it must exist within this context, not over here. Plus, even if it could cross, we don't know whether it has been imported or not. So really, it's just safer and the done thing to import it directly in here. So as we click the button, it goes and fetches the module that we need. Okay, so from Project Tools, import main as proj. Remember, we also want to reload, because if we go and make a change to our script and click the button again, we don't want it to grab the old script that it's stored in memory. We want it to actually go and fetch it again, right? So reload the project module, and then we're just going to go proj dot, and then we don't have it in our list yet because we haven't actually refreshed it in here or reloaded it, but we have it called manage proj. Okay, if we click this button, it would cause the reload, which would mean it would find this script. Okay, and that is all we are going to have in our shelf tool, right? We do not want anything other than just causing the trigger of some external script, and that script can run everything else for us. So we click this, see it says select an action, and it pops up with a list of options, and depending on which one we select, it's going to return the index of that, right? So 2, 3, okay, so all of them are just returning an index. And now in our script we will come and finish this. So we're going to say here, if cell equals 0, right? Now what it was 0 was add, so what we want to do is we just want to run this function, okay? And we don't have to go and fetch it from here. We don't have to go proj dot, because you know we are running this within the project module, okay? So we just say add proj. Okay, then we're going to say elif, so else if cell equals 1, then we are going to remove proj. Okay, elif cell equals 2, then we'll do details proj, and then else, and I'm going to specifically put else, not just elif equals 3, because what if we go and add some other buttons later? We'll always try to make sure that cancel is at the end, okay? Because it just makes more sense. We've got all these options, and then on the far right hand side we've got the cancel button. So if we went and added in another button, we would obviously come and add in another alif, but then the else is always just going to return out of this function safely. Okay, so there we are. We now have that, and when we come back here, now we shouldn't have to even reload because the reload is built into our shelf tool, so we can click it and this should do something. We can click add and it pops up to add a project, which we can now come and add our new test. Follow this through, give it a code, right? We can now click it and say details. It's going to pop up with a list. We can see the details that we just filled in, and it prints a report. Ask for some details of this project, and it prints a different report. And we say, oh no, hang on, this isn't working for me. This is the one we need to remove. Let's go remove it. So it's test proj, and we say okay. And when we go to details, you'll see there's one less project. Okay, and we can click cancel, and then nothing happens. Right, so that is our actually the sort of the tool that we were building. Even though we started with this scene data, really what we were building first is this manage projects, because now on here, that is the step one of this, is setting a project. And now we're going to go and add that same kind of functionality to our plus and minus, and then we will build this menu. Okay, so let's do that right now. So we're going to jump in here and make sure you go through type properties, not through the spare parameters, right? And we're going to first talk about our plus and minus buttons, because these are just going to be running very simple callbacks, okay? Now we don't want to do it all in the one line over here. Ideally, we want our callback to just trigger a link to our Python module, and our Python module to trigger a link to our external script, so that we can offload as much as possible. Okay, so let's create a Python module first, because obviously we need one for it to exist. So there you go, Python module, right? And in here, so in our callback, when this button is pressed, we're going to refer to that Python module, but then run a function within that module. So we're going to need to go and define a function. So here, let's start with this. Okay, so we're going to say who dot, and we can do phm in this case, right? If you remember from our callbacks, you can use phm because that is actually who dot pwd dot hda module, right? So that means self, which this is even just a short way of saying who dot node self dot hda module. So this has an alias, which is hm. This has a short form, which is pwd, and these two combined have a short form, which is phm, right? So in as few characters as possible, we can just refer to our own Python module. So who.phm, and then we're going to just run a function there. So let's, for consistency's sake, we know we want to add the project. We know that that's the button here. We know that that's the name of the function in our script. So we're just going to keep it consistent all the way, okay? Because it's easier to then trace and see what's happening. So we're going to run this and make sure we switch to HScript and then back to Python so that that doesn't default, okay? So we have add proj. Obviously here we need to add that as a function. So we say define add proj. We don't need any arguments, but what we do want to do though in here is we want to essentially we need to make sure that the module is imported, right? But because we're going to be importing that module, well, we're going to be referring to that module again and again, we don't want to do it every single time we run that function. The same way that up at the top here, we import everything we need, okay? Sure, we might at some point reload it if we think that something will have changed, but we only import them once. So we're going to do the kind of the same thing here. Instead of importing in there, we will import here. So we'll say from project tools, import main as proj, okay? We will also immediately reload proj just in case. So it's whenever we load our actual tool, it will reload it and make sure that it's all up to date. But as a precaution, inside of our function, we will do the reload. So we don't need to redo the import, but we will do the reload before we run it, okay? And now what we're going to do is just say proj dot And then our function in our script is actually the same name as the function over here, which is generally a pretty good idea. Sometimes it's not possible because sometimes you have multiple buttons running one single function. So that's totally fine. But in this case, whenever it is possible, especially when it's just a direct link, then I like to do it exactly like this. So my button has the same name as the callback, which is the same name as this function in here, which is the same name as the function on the script outside. Okay. Right, so that's what we're going to do. And that means, I mean, if we click accept now, that should work. So when I click that, it runs the add function. Okay, so we don't have this one added yet, so we can run that. We can give it a code, and now that should be in our list. We can even check that it is. There we go. And we're just going to do the exact same thing for the minus. Okay, so the remove project. So on here, we'll switch that to HScript, switch it back to Python. We can copy this, but just call it remove proj. And then under the scripts, we are going to see we're already importing it, but we'll just create a new function called remove proj, where we reload proj, and then we say proj.remove. All right. Okay, so now when we click plus, we can obviously add, and when we click remove, it will pop up with a list that we can go and remove projects and obviously check the details. If you wanted, you could actually, I mean, you're welcome to go and do it now. You could build a details button on here as well if you want, you know. Very, very easy to do that. Just go and, you know, duplicate this. We'll go and give it something else, like maybe you know, for like information, or you could type the word details or something and then just go and do details proj, and then scripts. In here we just do the exact same thing, but details proj, and then we run the details, and then or maybe question mark, maybe that's a better one for that. I don't know. Well, you can put whatever you want, and then obviously we just need to make sure that this is set to horizontally join to next parameter, the previous one. Okay, so now we'll end up with 3 buttons. And if we do that, we can ask for the details of a project. Oh, sorry, guys. Okay, so that would ask for the details, but then this can add or remove. So we can remove a project, add a project. Let's add this one back in, give it a code, ask for details. So tell us about that one, tell us about that one. Cool, you know. So very easy to build these callbacks and just run those scripts. All right. So now that we've done that, I want to just do one other bit of cleanup before we then move on to the menu. I've kept referring to how we basically want to be able to offload these to a utility script. So let's do that right now before we get too far, because these kinds of functions are going to be run several times across all of our different modules that we build. So we might as well offload this now once so that we don't ever have to recode these. Okay, so we're going to go back to where we are storing all of our scripts. Okay, and in the exact same way that we created this, we're just going to create a utilities script section. Okay, so we'll call it utility scripts, like that. Okay, and this is sort of a global thing. We would actually build this up over time with just tons of little scripts that help us fix paths and do all sorts of things that any scripts within any context would want to maybe be able to do. And then under new, we'll just create a new text document over here, and we can say, in fact, actually, hang on. I want to show you how to do it through PyCharm just in case, because we've done it through the text documents before. So let's copy this whole section, but then here in PyCharm, we can say file, new project, and then we can give it the path to that, right? And then we'll say, let's say new window, just to keep it nice and separate, right? So we would say it's going to now create a project within that environment. It's taking its sweet time. right? And now, oh, come on, it's so slow. Right, there we are. Right, so now when we go back here, okay, in our utility script, it's obviously created some scripts over here for us, or some things that it needs, but basically in this folder, we can right click and say File New, and then we can create a Python file instead of just a normal file, right? So we can say create a Python file, we give it a name. So first of all, we're going to call it init.py. Okay, so we're going to create an init function. And then, so that is just whatever's going to run when the utility scripts is loaded, which we can leave it blank, but what it does do is make sure that utility scripts is treated as the module, okay? So we can call it using its module name. And then we're also going to create main.py, okay? So let's just close that all down. So we've got our two scripts up here, our main and our init, right? And it will have created them over here. This whole thing with creating the virtual environment or whatever, look, you don't even have to necessarily do that. We can go through new project, which you could also have done. What we could have done is clicked open and gone to that project, just that folder, and just said open it. So it'll kind of open it and treat it as though it's a project. And as long as we create this init.py and main init, it will then treat the utility scripts as a module. Okay, so technically you don't even need that virtual environment folder, right? Okay, so now we can offload our scripts here. So let's go to these ones over here, and so it's the fix path, reporting an error, and printing a report. I'm going to copy these, but I'm not going to cut them out of here. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just disable them. So with everything selected, if you do Control /, it will disable it all. I just want to do that so that I can, before removing it, I can just test that this works. So we're pasting this all in here. Now you'll see there's a few modules that we'll probably need. Well, one of them being specifically who, right? And then I don't see any others, because you'd see them with little red squiggly underlines, right? Over here, it's obviously saying that it wants an extra line. Otherwise, oh, and it needs a new line at the end of the file. Okay, so otherwise that's pretty happy. So we can save that. We can test within Houdini over here. We should be able to say import utility scripts. And you see that doesn't error, which means it has found it. We can say utility scripts, and it will actually show us the path, which is correct. You see it's running that init.py. So we would be able to do that in here as well. So within our project path over here, instead of using all of these, we would now go to everywhere where it was referring to fixed path, right? So we can even, with that selected, by the way, if I click Control F, it will do a find, but it actually already fills that in. So that's quite nice and handy. So it shows us we're using it 3 times, right? So we come over here, and we can do a search and replace if you want, or sometimes I like to do it manually just because, well, if it's only a few, like 3, because I just want to be very careful and certain that this is going to work. Okay. Now what we would be doing is we actually need to import up here our new module, right? So we're going to say from utility scripts import main as, and then let's call it util, right? And then I also just want to reload util. Okay. And then by the way, you'll see before I did this reload though, you'll actually notice that if we are importing a module that doesn't end up being used, it goes gray. And that's a really good way for you to know that you can go and remove that module. Maybe you were using it for something and then you found a different way to do it, and now there's certain modules that are being imported and not used. So very good to know that. Okay. And now we can go wherever we find our fixed path and swap it instead for util.fixedPath, right? And that should then give us the exact same function, because it's just going to that and running that same function, right? Same with our errors over here, it would just be util.error, right? But instead of doing it that way, let's do that with a search and replace, okay? So let's say that wherever it finds the word error, but maybe we want to be specific, so it'll be error open bracket. Okay, so we can do a Control R on that, which will be find search and replace. And I'm including that bracket because it then is specifically going to be when I'm running a function called error, as opposed to just using the word error, right? You can also use regular expressions, which is something we haven't spoken about yet, but we will be doing soon. And I think you can use wildcards and things as well. The search and replace for this is actually really, really good. And all we want to do is swap it for util.error, but include that bracket so that it swaps that for that, right? And we can do them one at a time if you want, or you can kind of just flick through and check that they all seem to be correct, and then just say, well, let's exclude this one, and then say replace all, and it'll go and fix them all. Right. And then same thing for the print report. So let's do Control R, and we're going to swap print report for util.printreport bracket. Okay, we'll exclude that one, and there is only one other one, so we'll just go and replace that. Okay, so now we should be fine. If we go through here, we should see that there is nothing broken. Those utility scripts have been disabled, and yet if we run our normal scripts, everything should work correctly. For example, maybe printing a report. That was one that definitely uses it. So we click there, click OK, and it prints a report perfectly fine. Why is that printing? Because it's calling this print report function from here, because this one over here is disabled. So now that we know it's working, we can go and remove that. Okay. And make sure that everything's happy. Doesn't matter. Right. Okay. So now that we've offloaded all of that, something else we need to do quickly is talk about this menu, right? So we have a drop-down menu here. At the moment, it's just populated by something we've manually entered. But because we now have access to our JSON file, we need to go and read that. Okay. And so in order to do that, we need to actually create our scene data module, because these are all just additional buttons that are functions of an external kind of script, right? But this here, although it is very related, is actually part of our scene data node. This drop-down menu only exists here, and so we're going to start with this menu and all of the functions that go with it, and building up, setting our project and setting all these variables. All right, so we will do that in the next lesson.